So folks, today we'd like to talk about something that is very near and dear to our hearts here at Recovering Champions, which we would title Developmental Considerations in Substance Abuse Treatment. Sorry about the pause there. The reason why we think it's so timely is because of the change in today's demographics. Once upon a time, the average age of detox was someone much older, perhaps most likely an alcoholic, someone who was old enough to have felt the sting of loss in their lives, a marriage or a job or maybe an arrest. In today's demographics have changed quite remarkably, where we see many of our admits are people in their 20s and suffering from opiate addiction, which means, of course, that the progression of their addiction has been much more rapid. There's no span, really. It just came apart very quickly. And for many of our younger admits, their using began when they were in their teens. And, I think everybody would agree that when addiction really gets kicking, people tend to stop growing and changing at the point the addiction takes over. And so we get kids in that are in their 20s that are still stuck at a much younger developmental age and stage and haven't yet mastered certain developmental tasks, some of which are kind of important to have mastered for them to even succeed in treatment in the first place. So here you are having people with some of the most serious, torrid addictions needing the help more than ever, and yet conventional treatment often isn't taking into account the fact that their developmental stage and age is such that they may not even be able to benefit from treatment as it is sometimes conceived in this world that we work in. So what we're trying to do here, and we're talking about this as a way to invite your comment, because we'd love to hear what you have to say, is how an appreciation and a consideration of developmental psychology in substance abuse treatment can improve treatment effectiveness. We could talk on and on. I'm certainly good at that, but I think right now I'll just sort of hop right on to what some of the developmental traits and challenges are of someone who's in their early adulthood, or perhaps developmentally much younger than that, someone who's a preteen or a teen. And so this list is non-inclusive, but I'm just spitballing here. People that are younger tend to be more concrete in their reasoning, not abstract. So, the use of long-winded metaphors and deep philosophical discussions sometimes are lost on them. It makes me think of a story when I was working with some kids in another program. One of my staff was getting very worked up about this kid's lack of willingness to choose a direction and to buy into his treatment. And this guy was ranting and raving and steaming and stomping around and likening life to a buffet, chicken, fish, steak. And he was imploring this kid to choose, what do you want, chicken, fish, or steak? And the kid said, dude, I'm not even hungry. And, I kind of saw that coming at the time. It's still funny when I think about it today, but it does capture the fact that, some of our kids are still so concrete in their thinking that, we assume that we're reaching them, but we're not talking to a person our own age. We're talking to someone much, much younger. Moral development. Teenagers get labeled all kinds of crazy things for the crazy things they do. I have heard staff say that the only reason why that kid is doing what you want him to do is because he knows he's going to get a reward for doing so. And I say, okay, does that make him, selfish and manipulative, or does that just reflect an earlier developmental stage of moral development? We kind of talk about this. Little kids will steal the cookie or not because they're afraid of getting punished. It's only until much later in life when we start to recognize the intrinsic rightness and wrongness of things apart from the consequences. And a lot of our clients haven't gotten there yet. And so it's not something to judge them for, it's something to recognize and to work with, perhaps using reward or consequences, some leverage, because by meeting them where they're at, you can help potentiate the resumption of their growth, if that makes any sense. Okay, so social self for young kids. Well, we know teenagers and young adults are very concerned with their peer belonging. They're much more likely to respond to their peers and reject the authority and the intrusions of adults and authority figures. And they're very preoccupied with how they fit in, with their gang, with their tribe, their dress, things they say. It seems kind of shallow to us, but it's really part and parcel of young adulthood and adolescence is the social self as defined by the group. And, here we are, these wise and sage treatment veterans wanting to dispense our wisdom, but it seems like the kids don't really care what we have to say. Well, it's because they're not shopping from our menu yet. So how do you work with that, without taking it too personally? And then there's the bit about authority, I think all of us know, even though we don't have to like it, that adolescence and young adulthood is about separation and individuation from family, and that often takes a form of oppositionality and rebellion and risk-taking, and it can be a very painful process, but it's not an abnormal process, and it kind of has to happen. And so what we often have here in treatment sometimes is people that are in that process, and staff are taking it either personally or too literally and are trying to hammer down the nail that sticks up, if you will, and use control to try and change behavior, when really it's not a fight about control. It's a stage of behavior that's necessary. It needs to be challenged, channeled and worked with, but show me a teenager that isn't challenging or rebelling against authority, and I wonder what is wrong with that kid, Physical learning. A lot of our kids are kids, and they're very physical and in restless, maybe even agitated, squirmy. Here we are, making them sit through group after group after group. And then we get mad at them when they get all squirmy and they get up and pace around or leave the room. Or why can't they sit and do step time for 2 straight hours? I don't think I can do step time for 2 straight hours, and I'm in my 60s, for crying out loud. But for these kids, they're learning how to contain their psychomotor. They're learning how to settle themselves down. But they haven't gotten there yet. And yes, they need to learn how to do all that stuff, but at the same time, because they're so in their bodies, they need things that activate that part of them. And they need to be able to move around. They just have to. Their insight is limited. So, for some insight-oriented talking therapy, it can be a wonderful thing indeed. All us regular old therapists love it. But for kids, it has some limitations. The biggest one of which is just insight alone doesn't change human behavior. But our kids aren't the most comfortable reflectors, and they're not always so great at putting feelings and thoughts into words. And so, interventions that really rely on insight and reflection can kind of run dry a little bit if that's really all that you're asking them to do in treatment. And then there's the piece about accountability and discipline. We all know that younger kids need those things. But similar to the rebellion piece, I think it's a mistake to believe that the way to deal with that is to clamp down. I think that all kids have very different needs. I mean, I can think of my own children. My oldest son is a very obedient kid. My middle one is kind of wild and crazy. And you would think that the older one would warrant the longer leash, and the middle one would need the shorter leash, but actually it's not. It's the other way around. The rambunctious and rebellious kid actually needs a longer leash, because if you try and yank it too tight, he's going to break it. and they need a little bit more room to be who they are. My oldest loves the short leash. It's easy enough to give it to him, but it's not for everybody. And for our clients, we have to be discerning about what works for them. The other thing I would point out is that there's a difference between discipline and consequences, and we all know discipline derives from the word, I guess, disciple, and it's meant to reflect teaching. And very often, a lot of the stuff that we do with our younger clients really falls in the realm of punishment or consequences, and I'm always wondering whether it's teaching them something or not, because punishment alone doesn't change behavior. It just makes people avoid the behavior that they got punished for. You might say that's the same thing. I don't. To work with kids, knowing that they aren't just addicts, but addicts stuck in earlier stages of human development, makes for a much bigger challenge. And it really, really matters that we try and make an effort to meet them where they're at so that they can better negotiate those developmental tasks and challenges and actually master them and grow. But if we're trying to teach them, or reach them with, the cookie cutter stuff that's been working forever and ever and that everybody's supposed to be able to respond to, I think that we're making a mistake. So in terms of what the kids need, well, it's not rocket science, folks. I think that our younger clients need, as much as anybody, but perhaps even more so, attachment and a sense of belonging. Our place has to be a family and a group to which they want to belong, that they feel like they matter, that their individuality is respected, where they feel that they're being held accountable, but in a way that's not judgmental. You try and erase the individuality of a teenager and you never hear from them again. And our kids want to belong to something, but they're only going to belong to something where they feel that they are respected for who they are and that they are not judged. And also where there's people that they can respect and look up to. They need belonging and mattering. They also need a role or a purpose and jobs to do. I think that here at treatment, we try and do that for our clients. We also encourage them to join home groups because in a home groups are actually in AA or NA are actually the foundation for being active in your recovery. You get a job, a service job, handing out key tags or setting up or taking down chairs, going out on commitments, but it's also a place where you recognize, where you're known, that you matter. Hey, Toby, how's it going? It's good to see you. Help me with this. And kids really need that. They need to know they belong. They need to know that they're a part of the group. Our kids need mentorship. Therapists that tell kids what to do are generally going to lose their readership or their viewership. It really needs to be more of a back and forth. And hopefully what would evolve is some form of mentorship where the kids are looking up to you for what you bring to the table. But once again, they have a sense of being cared for but not controlled. So here, we're trying to demonstrate caring, but not control. We're trying to challenge them to be a better person, to be accountable. And they like that. And I tell the younger clients, that when we expect things from you, it means that we care about you, we esteem you, we value you. If we didn't care, we wouldn't ask you to do anything, So it is important to know that. Interestingly, in 12-step, the role of sponsorship is very important for the same reason, that it provides sort of grist for their mill to practice having relationships with people that have some authority or power and a mentorship role. And it's not easy, it's a struggle for them. But they're not going to get better at what they're not good at and master this stuff unless they are active in the struggle. So sponsorship is very important. Our kids, they need adventure and they need fun. Now, the requirements of treatment are many. We all know that we have to make all our marks so we can get reimbursed, so we can get licensed, so we can be accredited. somewhere we have to pack some fun in there because kids need that so much. And it's not just fun in terms of activities we do, but also being fun with them. So it does require, I think, those of us working with the younger clients to try and be a little bit more playful ourselves without sacrificing authority or our role. But they tend to see people that are able to have fun and joke a little bit, jostle around, and be kind of kid-like in our own appropriate ways as someone who's genuine and real and accessible to them. Our kids need structure and they need routine, no different than any teen, no different than any child. And yes, it is true that if you create this with them and then hold them to it, that they will like that and they will thrive in it. But once again, it can't be too overbearing or overwhelming. It can't be suffocating because they need their leash and they need their freedom. But their structure and routine is very important, and we build it in here to the days, but also when they transition to the community, we also want to make sure that they have a very clear sense of what their structure will be and what their routine will be, so they can feel safe in their daily lives. And a lot of the work that we do as they come in, say for IOP or OP, is to go through that list, their self-care, their routine, to always be checking to see if they're sticking with it. And then the next thing, like I say, it's not an all-inclusive list, but our kids haven't had jobs, they haven't had relationships, they really have been out there, and they need a lot of coaching and training, particularly in the aspect of how to negotiate reasonable, independent, sober living. We do a lot of dress rehearsal and role play with our clients, a lot of coaching about job interviewing, and how to talk to people that are older than them in ways that keep the connection rather than having people just hang up or give up on them. Case management plays a hugely powerful role in this regard, as does the psychoeducational stuff that we offer. But our kids need a lot of information, a lot of coaching, a lot of training, and a lot of support. Because our clients are young and they have some very unreasonable expectations. I remember one of my sons was demanding that I celebrate him having emptied the dishwasher one day, and I said, "What do you want me to throw you a parade? This is what some responsible adulthood is like. You do stuff that needs to get done without being asked to or praised for having done it." Of course I am glad that you did it, but a lot of our kids do expect a lot for what they do, aside from the paycheck, and sometimes their expectations are pretty unreasonable. So we coach them, and we train them, and we support them. So that's a very general take. People often ask me, well, what do you do when you have a really difficult kid who's got very delayed moral development, who's stuck in a much earlier developmental stage, and they're in addictions treatment? And I just tell folks that when in doubt, the fundamentals always apply. Suspending judgment. Teenagers are very easy to label and judge. They're very easy to get angry with or frustrated by or feel insulted or disrespected by. But we have to have a little bit thicker skin. We want to give them feedback about how stuff makes us feel, but we're really just, we're their practice, They need to get better at this. They need practice. What else? The kids will tune out if we are communicating something along the lines of we assume that we know what's best for them or what they want. Sometimes our kids' stated goals will be very, cringeworthy, shall I say. But the best conceived plan in the world is worthless if there's no buy-in from the kid. And so we have to work to create buy-in and try to suspend our cringe factor a little bit in hopes that they'll head in the right direction eventually. So what else? I have to glance down here. We have to remember that all behavior is always in service of some need, even senseless behavior. Doesn't mean we have to like it, but very often, our kids, they lack the insight, as we've established before, and they'll be behaving in a certain way, and it's very difficult to do, but we have to do it. We have to step back and say, what need is this behavior meeting? And not that we want to excuse the behavior, but so that we can understand what's driving it and help the kids develop different ways to meet those same needs. If we're reacting to their behavior and judging it and consequencing it or censoring it, we're missing the biggest part of what's going on there and missing a big treatment opportunity. We try to reward direction, not perfection. You think about kids and their particular lifespan, you know, when kids are born, how long before they're ready to go into the world? Well, minimally, we expect them to be ready after 18 years, but we all know that even that's not long enough. And, you know, all the stuff that kids go through over all those infinite number of days with their parents over 2 decades. And why would we expect our kids here in treatment to change in 30 days? It's kind of silly. But it happens quite a bit. And what really bothers me sometimes is when people will say that a kid has failed the treatment, when really what I'm thinking there is that treatment failed the kid because it was really not taking a look at what was going to work for the kid. It's got to be client-centered and kid-centered, within reason. And then in terms, the last thing that you want to always think about is a transference is addressed to occupant. I think that's a phrase from Scott Rutan. But kids are going to use you as grist for their mill again and again and again. You can't take it too personally. You want to use it with some leverage to help give them feedback that will be useful to them. But it's not really about you. Be mindful of that, and if you are, then you'll be able to step back from it and use it rather than just react to it. So that's all I have for now. Once again, we just sharing with you some of our broadest thoughts, inviting your input, hoping that we all in this industry can get better at incorporating developmental considerations in our substance abuse treatment in order to best help the kids that we're working with. And they are kids, folks. So that's all I have for today. Thank you.